The tall, human-like figure moved about the thick trees with no struggle at all. It was as if it was floating. It made no noise, and the only movement seen was the creature lunging forward. It was graceful, yet terrifying. My eyes grew as I watched it skim over a frozen lake and back onto the trees. I tried to make out its facial features, but I couldn't. Perhaps it was the fog, or my lack of concentration. I was just relieved that I hadn't seen its face, though I tried. I'm sure it was just as horrifying as the tentacle-like bones extruding from the creature's back. Time stood still, and I froze the closer I got to it. Why was I approaching this thing anyway? That, I still don't know. Something about it was inviting though. Something about it made me want to come to it. My heart was pounding at a fast rate, but my legs were moving faster as I chased the creature. It turned a sharp corner and I turned right behind it, but stopped myself, dead in my tracks, when I saw that it had stopped itself. In front of it was a small girl, around 9 years of age. She stared up at it in horror, and I feared for her life as well as mine. I tried to wave her off, but to no avail. She seemed captivated by the creature's appearance the way I had been. She slowly stood up, and as she did, I fell back and crawled beneath a bush. I couldn't look away, and all I did was watch. The creature brought its face close to hers, and as it did, her eyes grew, and she began to shake, covering her eyes. She was terrified, and compared to her, I had nothing to be afraid of. She was only inches away from the being, and she was now looking at it face to face. I'd never seen someone take in something and consider it deeply, and yet have such terror in their eyes. The little girl fell, but as I took a closer look, I could see a small chest filling in with air and releasing. She wasn't dead, but she was unconscious. I took a closer look at it, and from my observations, I concluded that the being's gender was male. It took her and dragged her behind it. He was slowly creeping ahead this time, and I felt the need to follow. So of course I did so with no hesitation. I was at the point that I couldn't even think. After several minutes of following, he stopped at a clearing. The trees that surrounded the empty area were draped with ropes and nooses, mutilated bodies, and limbs were hanging from them. One body had been hung slowly, I could tell. The fingers of what once looked remotely human had been clawing at its own throat, trying to break free from the noose. What was this? There had to be at least 30 murders committed here. I looked in terror at my surroundings. Guts hanging from torn skin, people with gouged out eyes. I began to panic, and as soon as I felt tears streaming down my face, then I turned my attention to the girl. The poor girl had been gutted in the short amount of time it took for me to realize where we were at. Her eyes were gone, and her limbs had been cut off, but the creature was gripping the stubs to slow the bleeding. I only cried harder when I saw her working, yet displaced lungs, and her beating heart. Everything was still working because nothing had been removed fully. She was still alive. That's when, with one movement, the creature ripped her heart away from what was keeping it beating. I gagged and almost vomited, but stopped myself. I couldn't let this happen to me, not like all those other people had. I couldn't let myself be heard, but my body was frozen, so I couldn't turn around and run away. He then hung what was left of her body up from a rope. The surrounding trees had died. I'd noticed. He stopped all movement while hanging the child's left arm up. He knew of my presence, and he quickly turned around and faced me. Terror took over. I tried to let out a scream for help, but I couldn't. I knew this is what death himself looked like. I saw nothing. He was faceless. He had no face, and yet he was the most terrifying thing I'd ever laid eyes on. Right as he turned, I heard a faint shrieking noise. A very loud, ear-piercing buzzing. The kind you hear from a TV that's lost service and shows nothing but static. And in hearing this, I saw what seemed to look like static as well. Everything around me began to spin and blur into nothing but black. Though, before it did, the creature revealed to me that he did have a mouth. And how he did this still pains me to think about. How he showed no pain, but instead a murderous grin. The pale skin that should have been a face slowly stretched until it ripped open in the form of a mouth. Parts of skin were still intact, and the skin on the corners of his newfound mouth ripped upwards to form a contorted smile. I knew I was seeing what that girl had seen, and I knew I was hearing what she'd heard as well. I was now unconscious, and I knew for sure I wouldn't wake up. What happens next shocked me. I didn't know why he didn't kill me, and I didn't know why he'd taken me to a different part of the woods before I had a chance to wake up. But for whatever reason, he spared me. And I know why, now, because I've read about it. This creature was the Slenderman, and now I've read more about him. I know now that his prey is children, and that alone is the only reason why he didn't waste his time on me. Even though he'd had the perfect opportunity to kill me, he didn't, because I wasn't a child. Maybe he simply gets a sick joy from murdering innocents, but I don't want to know. And you shouldn't want to either. I'd like for this to be the last time I ever talk about it, though it is the only time. Please be cautious, and for whatever reason you may have to go into the woods, don't. If you decide to and you spot the Slenderman, look away right as you do, and don't look any longer, or the same will happen to you. And trust me, once you see him, he will reveal himself to you a lot more than once. He still, to this day, follows me. Please, don't let the same happen to you too. After waking up with a jolt, the girl laid in bed for a few seconds longer. Reaching over to switch on her bed lamp, she tried to remember exactly what had stolen her sweet slumber away. When she couldn't, the brunette swung her legs over the side of the bed and heaved herself up. Checking the time on her phone, she snorted when she saw it was midnight, the witching hour. Knowing that sleep would only evade her, she left the bedroom for the kitchen, a good cup of coffee on her mind. As she passed her front door, a chill spread like liquid fire down her spine. It's only winter, she told herself, focusing again on the coffee plan. Measuring out scoops, water, and preparing a cup kept her occupied. But as the dark liquid boiled, she had nothing left to keep her mind from wandering off. The chill returned, and she couldn't help but glance behind her to the front door. It stood there, innocently enough, just like always. The deadbolt was still in place, and she could see nothing amiss with it. Turning back to her coffee, she did her best to forget about the feeling. With her cup in hand, she started back towards her bedroom. As she walked by the front door, she decided that a quick glance out of the peephole would help calm her restless mind. The chill worsened with each step she took towards the door and further away from the safety and warmth of her blankets. She pressed her empty hand against the cold, metal door and took a deep breath before leading her eye to the peephole. At first, she could only see an inky blackness, and somehow seemed to swirl in itself. When she blinked in surprise, the void melted away. She wished it hadn't. In its place, there stood what she could only guess was once a man. The limbs were long and inhumanly awkward, with bulky joints branching off into several arms, not unlike the branches of a tree. The creature was draped in a black suit, somehow making the thing more nightmarish to her. The icing on the proverbial cake, however, was what passed as the hellish thing's face. It was as though her mind blurred the ghastly visage to spare itself further shock and horror. She shoved herself away from the door with the hand still pressed against it. The scalding mug of coffee fell, the liquid burning her bare leg as she fell backwards and tried to crawl away from the door. She knew, somehow, that her mind hadn't been playing tricks on her. As she walked away from the door, she watched as tendrils, as black as the voids she first saw, snake around through the cracks. The girl was trapped between the instinct to flee and the gut feeling to not turn her back on the door. When the door jolted, the urge to flee overcame her, and she slipped in the burning liquid as she tried to make it back to her room. She knew deep down that she was trapping herself in a corner, but she had to get away from the door. The girl was halfway down the hallway when she heard the previous locked door creak open. She screamed and slipped into a wall, cracking her chin on it and stunning her. After that, there was only blackness. "Nicole?" A warm, male voice snapped the woman out of a trance. As she turned around, she was met by one of her sister's doctors. She nodded, not sure if she could say anything, or even if she could find a voice if she did have something to say. That morning, she had gotten an urgent phone call from the hospital saying that her sister, Lindsay, was there. Before they had even let her see her, the doctors had pulled her off to the side and insisted that they talk to her about what might have happened. Phrases like self-inflicted and assault had been thrown around, and Nicole felt her mind reel. She still hadn't fully understood what they had been saying until she saw Lindsay with her own eyes. Her little sister had a bandage wrapped around her head, covering both her ears as well as her eyes. They said it was to keep her now deadened eyes from drying out and to try to keep the infection out of the wounds Lindsay had made to her ears. The doctors had guessed that either she or someone else had jammed a pencil into them to keep her off balance or to deafen her against something. There was a mix of first and second degree burns on her hands and legs and feet, from what was assumed to be the coffee her neighbours found slipped all over the entry to her apartment. As Nicole walked up to her sister's hospital room for the first time, she had spied the silhouette of a man in the window. That, she knew, was impossible. Her sister's room was on the third story of the hospital. I spent most of my Thursday nights driving. I drop the girl off home and then I go. I just go anywhere. I need those few small moments where I can feel completely free from everybody. There's a road that stretches around an old garden shop that my friends all worked at for a few years. It started just outside the south of the city, a little road that veered right so suddenly that I was doing 20 under the limit just so I can spot it on time. It led past the garden shop and into straight blackness. I've been on that road a few times with some friends and I can predict most of the turns and stops far before I can see them. As I left the light of the city, I flashed on my high beams and made the sudden right onto the road. I must have turned in too quickly. Gravel and dust filled the back of my car, sort of a dark cloud that took away all the light from the city behind me, just for a moment. The tires lost traction, and I started to veer into the ditch, fortunately saving myself with only inches to spare. My little Toyota Tercel was not the best thing for dirt roads, but it's enough to get what I want out of it. The road stretches far beyond my sight, fading into a chilling blackness. It has a few houses, small farmlands, and barns strewn along it, with each their own twisting paths. The trees above loom over, cracking all the light coming from the sky above. Long branches stretch towards the ground, like long fingers pointing. I picked up more and more speed as the road started to straighten out, watching the edge of my headlights guide my way to a tranquil place, far beyond the worries of mine or any others. Up on the lip of a hill is a small spot that overlooks the city, a popular place for many teenagers here in the South End, often seen with many couples solidifying their nights and the occasional group of stoners who like to simply watch things. The road leads up to this place, curving right until the top is reached. As I climbed it, I can already see the taillights of 4 or 5 cars up there, all minding their own business. I see a darker road, far less travelled upon, emerging on my left, avoiding the city watchers. I've never seen this road before, but I figure that if I had a full tank and stay 1 hour within the city, what the hell? Might be worth my while to see something I haven't seen before. The road runs directly west and is completely straight, with no houses, farms, or barns peppered along its curb. Even the trees have disappeared, opening up the view to a vast farmland with hills on both sides of the road, just cutting off the sight of any further land. Perfect. I stay in this road for a long time. My iPod is on shuffle and much of the music is hitting all the right notes I want to listen to, mostly that of Led Zeppelin. There is nothing like blasting Stairway to shut out all the noises outside. It must have been 20 minutes before I started to worry. The hills on both sides of the car had grown so close to the road that they have turned into walls, blocking any sight around me. A tiny valley that seemed to stretch into infinity. I figured I should have turned around and come back the way I came. So I didn't make any turns, so it should be easy for me to follow it all the way back. So I pulled over and made a U-turn. I even signaled for it. I don't know why I did, but for a second, that signal light caused something that stopped me in my tracks. It was tall and looked like a man, but it couldn't have. It could have been a bush that the shadows made look taller, even thinner. I waited there for a few seconds with my headlights on that spot, but there wasn't anything. My car kicked into the highest gear and I was sailing. I wasn't going any faster than I needed to be, since there were a ton of deers that like to run in front of things out here, but fast enough that I was breaking the limit more than I was obeying it. From behind me, a light started to fill my mirror. I couldn't make out what it was at first, but it was definitely headlights, and they were coming closer. I started to slow down, but still keeping momentum in the case that it might be one of the highway rangers making the rounds on the deserted roads. But something told me that whoever this person was, they weren't carrying a badge. Closer and closer the car got, gaining on me like they were being chased by something. As the car became clearer, it zoomed past me in the oncoming lane, honking frantically. It could be a couple kids out for a kegger, I don't know. It didn't really alarm me until I looked in my rear view again. Behind me was a face with no features, pale as paper, staring at me. It didn't move. It didn't even react to the bumps on the road. It was just there, like a picture on a screen, staring back at me. I was so frightened that I almost lost control of my car, drifting onto both the left and right lane as I tried to grasp myself. I looked behind me and there was nothing. Not a single thing. The air hung fuller than before, almost damp, and every breath filled my lungs with a thick, moist air. It was the same thing as earlier, from the turning signal. I am terrified. I pushed down hard on the gas, starting to speed past untouched places on my speedometer. I began to wonder if this is what the other person was running from, and if they got out. Then, I see a dim, red light ahead of me. The other car. This time, it is going slower, almost a cruising speed. I don't know if they think they're okay, but if it just got to me, then it is most certainly able to get to them. I start to honk frantically at the car as I speed past it on the oncoming lane. It doesn't move. I look in my rear view again and then I see something. Not it, but the driver of the other car. I start to feel an upset feeling in my stomach, like I was about to throw up. That couldn't have been me. It couldn't have. I shake my head to compose myself and put the road back into my view. My eyes are cleared and the headlights behind me disappear into the blackness. I am finally out of this, and I can start to see the hills spread apart to where they were in the beginning. I let out one laugh at the situation and rubbed the sleep from my eyes. When I opened them up again, that thing stood in front of my car, dark and hunched over, staring back at me with the same non-existent eyes. My wheels catch on the gravel as I try to avoid it and run full speed into the ditch, flipping the car over. I begin to think about why I chose this road. There could have been any other. I crawl out of the wreckage with as much strength as I have left, and just before I fall asleep, a Toyota Tercel is driving down the road I just came, blasting Stairway to Heaven. I didn't even bother to scream. You tried to keep as quiet as possible, which was hard. All that running around made you tired. You breathed heavily. You didn't know whether to keep your flashlight on or off. None of the notes so far provided that information. You checked through them again. You didn't know if you found them in order, but did it matter? What if it did? First, you thought you knew why he was after you. Your eyes, your lips. All the things he didn't have, you did. But soon, you found that you weren't the only one. Why didn't he take their facial features? And besides, he didn't need them. You sat in the corner of a room, the notes spread out before you. There was a drawing with just him and the trees surrounding him. You liked that one the most, as it provided no information whatsoever. The less you knew, the safer you were. Sometimes you felt as if he did it for his own entertainment, as if he enjoyed it. But you got to know him more and more every time he appeared. Maybe he would have left you if you hadn't found the notes. At first, he only trailed behind you. The more you found out, the more he treated you as a threat. Your flashlight started to flicker, snapping you out of your thoughts. Did he find you? This hadn't happened before every time you were so close to being whatever it was he did. You knew so little about him, but he treated you as if you knew enough to be a threat. Curiosity killed the cat, after all. The light finally died out after what seemed like hours of flickering. You gathered all the notes and stuffed them in the pockets of your jacket. Standing up, you leaned on the wall. It would be easier to start running if he did find you that way. You hit the flashlight, trying to make it work. When it didn't, you indulged back into your thoughts. It didn't help to get rid of him, if you can get rid of him, but it did calm you down. For a millisecond, the light flickered on. You kept staring at it as if that would make it work. It did. Your lips twitched into a smile. You felt less lonely in the light. Your eyes followed the beam. It led them to a black tie. You were too scared to swipe the smile off your face. You had frozen. As your vision started blurring, you came back to your senses, running as fast as you could, back the same way you ended up in that room. When you were finally outside, you turned to the door you'd come out from to see if he was behind you. You sighed in relief, seeing that he wasn't. You walked as silently as you could, inspecting every tree for a note. You were in his territory. One of his names was the Tree Man. Every time your foot crunched the leaf, you looked back. Every single noise startled you. But you knew that it was silence you should fear the most. But you couldn't bring yourself to. You saw something white on a fat, leafless tree. A note. You frowned. You didn't want to read it, but you had to. When you reached the tree, you took the piece of paper off. "Don't look, or he will take you," it read. You stared at it. That's all you had to do? Not look at him? But then you realized he was right behind you. There was an urge to disobey, to turn around and face your fear. You turned, with your eyes closed, dying to open, to analyze his blank face. You felt he was gone, that you weren't able to disobey anymore, and so your eyes fluttered open. But he was there. It was terrifying, yet you couldn't look away. It was unlike any other face you'd seen. But as every second passed, it all became less visible. The lines became less distinct. And then finally, you couldn't see, feel, touch, taste, or hear anything.